We are live. Welcome to my video. This is going to be a completely spoiler-free review of seasons 1 through 3 of The Mandalorian, the show that started in 2019. Yes, I am aware that there are talks of a possible 4th season, but it's slightly unclear if that has been turned into the movie. And I think this originally was going to be a movie instead of a show, and then so flopped. Which, like, I feel bad for the people that... I'm sure it hurt some careers of some very talented people. I gotta say, I love this show, and I think some other really amazing things have come from them doing Disney Plus shows of stuff that, you know, was originally supposed to be movies. So I'm doing this now rather than waiting a while and you know, maybe there never will be a 4th season, and yeah, doing it now while it's still pretty fresh in my memory. The show is rated TV 14, so will this video be. I'm not spoiling any of the show itself, but I might spoil Star Wars leading up to, not including the very first episode of this. So this is one of those shows, you know, some people have been hesitant to start on it for various reasons. I don't know. Maybe the following will help you determine. If you like bounty hunters and a Star Wars spin-off, think you'd like Baby Yoda? If your heart's not Beskar. If you think Star Wars is a Western and don't need lots of Jedi, that's the show that you've looked for. Watch it now because it's great. And I am gonna start with... So, this... Yeah. One of the main things here is this is very much a Western. And you know, I can never remember if it's called Weird West or Weird Western, but yeah, one of those two is very much what's going on here. Let's see. So at its best, Star Wars movies and shows have always tried to have something that appeals to every demographic, and this one is no different. For manly men like yours truly, we have badass action and stoic cowboy leads. For women to fawn over, we have Baby Yoda. I'm joking about the manly men thing. Anyway, about me being... I'm certainly not always the, like, hyper-masculine or anything. Anyway, actions have consequences on the show. If Mando makes enemies of certain people, he has to avoid them. Meanwhile, they might be trying to hunt him, and at the same time, on the other hand, if he befriends someone, he may be able to count on them down the line. There is some black comedy in the show with an occasional mean streak to it. Intelligent beings are killed in painful ways, and it's played not as a necessary evil, but comedically. Season 2 was given a huge budget increase because of the popularity of Season 1, and it really shows. Let's see. Although I will say, even Season 1 is great. And yeah, really, every episode is great. There are ones where I have certain issues, but there isn't one that I wouldn't happily rewatch. Now, let's see. There is an overarching story, but a lot of episodes are one-offs. Mando will go to a place at the start of the episode, leave that place at the end. Over the course of the episode, he'll try to, you know, deal with some problem. The action scenes are varied, all the different things that can happen in Star Wars, you know, force powers, lightsaber stuff, vehicle chases, shooting flamethrowers, jetpacks, flying in space, driving speeders. Not all of this gets, like, equally much. I already mentioned, you know, it's not, like, packed with Jedi, which I understand was something, you know, a number of people expected from pretty much anything Star Wars when this came out. That was also something you saw with Solo. Now, yeah, there are a number of scenes where you genuinely can't figure out how the scene is going to end, and you know, there are action scenes where you can't, you know, you don't know how the characters are going to make it through. You know, this was something that I really felt The Force Awakens did not do well at. Now, right, there are some special features on Disney Plus about the show, and yeah, they didn't just go back to the other Star Wars films, they went back to the films that inspired Star Wars, samurai movies, westerns, and that's part of why this doesn't feel like, you know, more of just like trying to give us more of something we've already seen in Star Wars, but something that feels like it fits within Star Wars, but isn't 100% like what we've seen before. It's very important for the show that it sounded different, if not traditional, and the composer was told Ennio Morricone and Akira Kurosawa music, were very, were inspirations, and it's important for the music to communicate emotion for the protagonist, with his helmet covering his face. Yeah, the music, the music has always been a very important, for communicating emotion, for underlining, not underlining, but making clear exactly what we're supposed to be feeling while seeing something that, without the music, we wouldn't be able to tell exactly how we're supposed to feel about some of the things because they are so alien. So that's, yeah. The show does rehabilitate some aspects of the prequels, making them more gritty, real, emotional. The things that we who didn't love the prequels criticized about them. And, yeah, like other recent Star Wars, this is drenched in fan service. It handles it better than a lot of the other ones. Part of it is that a lot of it will just be this very brief thing, and it will be, stuff that, like, they'll go to a place, or there'll be a line, or something like that. Right, it has some amazing guest directors also. But yeah, it is not the how do I say this without spoiling? It's not where the sequel trilogy, like, there are scenes where it's like, well, I mean, I guess this is kind of just like essentially entire movies that play out a lot like the original trilogy. Here, it's more that it's just, it's there, and it's also, like, I can't even imagine watching the sequel trilogy without having watched the original trilogy. I realize some people, that was their experience. I'm not saying you couldn't follow them, like, story-wise you could, but and Star Wars has always acted like, well, you know this, don't you? Which I think works extremely well when you don't, and some of the time really well when you do. But yeah, here, like, right, like a lot of recent pieces of Star Wars, not all, this could be your first exposure to the franchise. You'd probably have an adjustment period if you watch all of this and then start watching some of the other stuff, perhaps especially the movies, with from certain aspects at least. But yeah, it's not constantly redoing scenes and movies and such. It's more, they'll say a specific word or show a specific alien or robot type, and yeah, if you've seen other Star Wars stuff, you'll be like, it's the Leo pointing at the television meme. But if not, you'll basically be fine. It doesn't, I would argue, doesn't get bogged down. And when they bring back, it does bring back at least one famous character, and that we've seen elsewhere in Star Wars, and they actually give them something interesting new. It's not just, oh, they're there to just support the adventure of the protagonist, like was a lot of the time the case in the sequel trilogy, No, they have something that it feels like, okay, no, this makes sense based on what we've seen of this character before, and it's almost like they'll briefly get to be, I don't know if the lead, but co-lead at least. And yeah, you know, the titular Mandalorian will help them out instead of the other way around. And yeah, that works really, really well. Now, yeah, Pedro Pascal plays the Mandalorian, and you know, he's pointed out we all, metaphorically speaking, have armor that we don't take off. You know, we don't want to show exactly who we are, so in that particular way, we are all like him. He ADRs all his lines, which makes sense. You know, he's wearing a helmet. He does an incredibly good job. It really does not feel like it's ADR. Like, I would not have guessed that it was ADR. Like, I was sitting there thinking, I don't know how, but they did a great job with, you know, making a microphone that could go in there and not be like ridiculously echoey and you know. Now, it is, of course, difficult, you know, how do the audience relate to a character who has a helmet on that you know, we can't see his face, and you know, basically he's like this person without a past. He's purely defined by being a bounty hunter. You know, it's like, oh, he always has been, always will be, and that's, you know, thankfully not what, you know, most regular people, you know, yeah, we aren't bounty hunters. But the very first episode, they make a really smart decision. It's revealed that he was found by bounty hunters as a kid, raised to be a bounty hunter, and there is something that I've decided against revealing in the spoiler-free review, but I'll just say by the end of the first episode, you know, we do genuinely feel like there is something, yeah, we feel like we can somewhat empathize with him in a way that might not have thought. And this is also, like, honestly, if the very first episode does not really get you interested in watching more, the show probably just isn't for you. Now, let's see, and right, I forget who, but someone, a user reviewer, professional critic, pointed out the performance is incredible. You can't see his face, so it's all body language. And yeah, the baby is the perfect cinema baby. Hardly ever throws up, you know, poops, does anything that gross at all. It's nearly always cute. Right, this also has some incredible guest star actors, and yeah, I don't really want to give them away. I'll just, you know, if you really badly want to know, you can look them up. And I think that might more or less be what I... But yeah, it uses some of the tropes from Westerns and does genuinely very much feel like, you know, like, yeah, I already mentioned, you know, Ennio Morricone. Like, this genuinely does... If Star Wars was ever going to do a, you know, Man with No Name, yeah, this is what it would look like. And I, considering that the you know, the original trilogy took a lot of inspiration from classic Westerns, yeah, like it is, I forget, I feel like I've heard, you know, I'm just real quick gonna see, let's see, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. But yeah, in the original trilogy, Boba Fett draws from the same archetype as the Man with No Name. You know, fistful of dollars for a few dollars more, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah, top-class Westerns. You know, so, yeah, you know, the fact that they, yeah, you know, yeah, I found something here. The Mandalorian's basically Star Wars fully embracing its spaghetti Western roots. And yeah, it's. I think that goes a long way in determining if the show is your kind of thing. You know, if you watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and thought the one thing that was wrong was, you know, that it wasn't a Star Wars show with, what is it by now, 25 episodes? Yeah, you're in luck. Here you go. Now, I think that might more or less, yeah, I do appreciate some people feel like over the course of the show it felt less like the Mandalorian's show and started to feel more like it belonged to other people and he was just along for the ride. I think, yeah, if you hear those words and think, oh, I don't like that, yeah, some of the show might not be for you. And I will say, this is kind of a show where if you stop partway through, you're gonna feel somewhat like you're, you know, missing the rest of... Like, if you watch all 3 seasons, like, by the end of Season 3, there is a perfectly fine place for the show to end, which I think they may have done because they weren't sure, or maybe they had decided and just haven't told us, I think, unless I forgot, that Season 4 was becoming the movie. But yeah, as you know, other than that, yeah, each season is more or less like a chapter in an overall story, but it is very much one of those where if you only go partway through, even if you watch the entire first season, maybe the entire first 2 seasons, you're gonna feel like something like it's not completely resolved in a, yeah, it's not quite as bad as it could be. Bad. It is very much a show where they want to they want you to watch every episode. You know, there are shows where you feel like, okay, I mean, you told enough of the story that I feel satisfied. I think I'm gonna stop watching now. You know. Now I think that might. I feel like there's something else that I really wanted to say. The show has more depth than one might think at first, which is also, you know, if you're gonna spend this much time, you know, 25 episodes on Star Wars, you do have to have more depth. I think it worked. Like, well, let's see. So the original trilogy, A New Hope, not a huge amount of depth. I don't think it needed it. It's, you know, it's an adventure. You know, you're along for the ride, and there's enough. You know, the good guys are this diverse group. The bad guys are fascists. You know, it's not exactly subtle about its, you know, what it's trying to say with that. And yeah, more depth simply wasn't necessary. It really, yeah, it is even in just the Empire Strikes Back that we get more depth. You know, as soon as Star Wars started to be more than just one, you know, self-contained movie, we did get more depth, or at least as soon as they released another of the main chapters. I guess technically before that we had the holiday special, which I haven't watched, but I'm told is not deep. But yeah, you know, there is a good amount of depth here, and it also does some good legwork in closing the gap. I appreciate the Revenge of the... Is there a the? Anyway, Revenge of the Sith did a lot of legwork to close the gaps between the prequels and the original trilogy, but there was still some stuff left. And I don't think that's a huge problem for that movie. I kind of wish it had done a little less legwork. Anyway, I've done an entire video on that movie purely, so... But this does a really good job, as I think makes a lot of sense for it, you know, yeah, closing that gap. It starts after the events of Return of the Jedi, you know, but there are flashbacks to prequel era and such. And yeah, it, understandably enough, tells us some more about Mandalorians. And I had heard some people early on say, well, these Mandalorians are so different from the ones on the Clone Wars. There is a reason for that. If you watch far enough into the show, it will be explained. You know, it isn't trying to erase, it's not trying to erase any canon, really. I think that might more or less... Yeah, the lore is fascinating. I really loved finding out more about... And it's one of those things. It's a very delicate balance. You gotta be careful not to show too much, because part of what's so cool about Boba Fett is how little we know about him. You know, so if you give too much away, you know, you take away the mystery that makes him so fascinating. They walk that tightrope incredibly well here, and yeah. I mentioned awesome guest directors. This is some of the best work for several of them, you know, which, considering some of the names, is quite impressive. Yeah, I think that might more or less cover... I guess I will just briefly address, so obviously, there is one of the... a non-zero number of episodes of this, and I realized they didn't know it at the time, features Gina Carano, who today, rightfully, you know, yeah, she kind of doused her own career in kerosene and then lit the match and then said, why would those woke people do this? Like, what are you talking about? You did this. Like, there's even, I forget where, but there was this, like, I saw a fellow leftist YouTuber read aloud some of what she had said in response, and she came, like, she genuinely said, oh no, like, they gave me a chance. They told me, hey, if you would just apologize for the things you said and did, because, you know, as I've just demonstrated to you, it causes real life harm, you know. And she was like, oh, so you're trying to tell me what to do? Because conservatives are so easily led. All you gotta do is tell them, oh, you see, that completely innocent person who's not hurting anyone, is just trying to get by and has way less power than you. They're telling you what to do, in that they are asking you to treat them with a little bit of basic decency and humanity, because literally in some of these cases it is actually life or death. So, you know, obviously you should hate them. Like, I don't know, I guess Gina Carano can go cry with Graham Linehan. They could make a support group of just, like... Anyway. Yeah, I rate this 8 unseen faces, you know, getting me to genuinely care about the person's story in a really cool Star Wars-y, weird Western, badass Western setting out of 10. And yeah, whether the next thing is a 4th season or the movie, I'm really stoked. I can hardly wait. More, please.